Smile is a horror film released back in 2022 following protagonist Rose Cotter, a therapist who endures deep psychological torture following a brutal incident with one of her patients. When Smile first released, it took the world by storm, grossing almost 13 times more than its budget. It's known for its absolutely brutal psychological warfare, as well as its gut-wrenching, perfectly placed SFX. This was a video I planned on making a long time ago, right as the film initially released. But I figured that this was such an obvious question that someone would surely cover it, right? Literally anyone? Regardless, this video will contain several major spoilers for the movie, and if you haven't watched it yet, it is truly a great watch. I'd highly recommend that you click off this video to go see the movie for yourself and come up with your own theories for how certain events were able to take place. As for those who have already watched the film, you probably remember seeing this scene here.
No, please, Trevor, I'm in danger!
Rose, did you kill Mustache?
No, that was not me.
Then tell me, what happened to him?
It was this thing.
Immediately after the film's release, many people began to make their own theories about what exactly this thing is. But have you ever stopped and actually took a moment to think about what was really said? What happened to Mustache? How did he die? It might be easy for you to say, oh, the entity killed it. But think about it. How? If you really think about it, it doesn't make sense considering we do know the limitations of this entity. We know that it can't interact with things in the real world and that it can only exist within your mind. It cannot take total control over your body until it has broken you enough to that point. So we know that it couldn't have possessed Rose to go and kill Mustache, so all possible answers just trail towards a dead end, right? Well, that leads right into my theory that the Smile monster is much more powerful and much more intelligent than we are led to believe, and as a result, it has fooled all of us. With the established limitations of the entity, to fully understand how the cat could have died, we also have to establish what the entity can do. So let's break that down to a science. The main ability of this entity is near total neurological control. Before it is able to fully possess a human being, it can control all of their senses. These false sensations are expressed through the movie as extremely vivid hallucinations. But if you take a close look, there's actually two types of hallucinations that are seen in the movie. Mobile hallucinations are the ones where we see our character reacting in the real world to an invisible force that's not there. For example, Dr. Cotter's patient Laura, from the beginning of the movie, was clearly in control of her own body when desperately crawling away from what she was seeing. Static body hallucinations, on the other hand, are hallucinations that make you think you're moving around and doing things in the real world, but in reality your body is paralyzed and immobile. The prime example of this being when Dr. Cotter believed that she had beaten the entity and left the old home, but in reality she did not move at all. Essentially, these two things are the difference between sleepwalking and dreaming in a way. It's hard to explain, so that's why we'll be using mobile and static body to refer to the different types of hallucinations. Unrelated to hallucination, however, the entity does have a third ability. It knows and has access to every single memory that you have and can use them against you. The movie does a great job at expressing this because we already know a few of the entity's victims that have directly had their past trauma used against them to torture them psychologically. For Munoz's case, it was his brother. For Laura, it was her grandfather, and Dr. Cotter, it's her own mother. Okay, now that we've established what it can and can't do, it's time to theorize. What happened to Mustache? A little bit into the movie, we're shown this scene.
What is wrong with you?
And from here, we can tell that Mustache has puncture-like wounds. It's not anything too dramatic, but he was clearly stabbed in some way, and from the looks of it, probably from something relatively thin and with a clean entrance. Now all we need to do is find the last moment that Mustache is alive. The last time that he's seen alive in the film is this scene 16 minutes into the movie when Dr. Cotter comes home following her patient's suicide. Because this is the last time he's seen alive, this gives us a frame of time so that now we know his death had to have occurred sometime between now and when Jackson opens up the gift box. Of this window of time, I'd say it's safe to rule out any moment before we get to see the gift being wrapped by Dr. Cotter on the table, and I'll explain those reasons later. But as for now, with that frame of time removed, this pinpoints only one possible scene where Mustache could have been stabbed. The intruder alert scene. When initially watching this scene, nothing seems out of the ordinary. Just an alarm that malfunctioned perhaps, and a little bit of trickery caused by the entity. But how does any of that explain how their cat Mustache died? Remember, he had a puncture-like wound and was clearly stabbed with something. But very early on in the scene, you might notice something of interest. Dr. Cotter actually gets a pair of scissors in order to defend herself from any potential intruders. The scissors she grabs are long, thin, and from the looks of it, pretty sharp. What if I told you that this pair of scissors may be the exact weapon that took Mustache's life? Like we've established before, the entity cannot possess you until it's broken you enough. However, nothing is stopping the entity from putting things in your mind to manipulate you to do certain things. Maybe you've caught on to what I'm saying by now. My theory is that the entire home intruder scene never happened. The alarm never went off, the police never showed up, and this entire scene was all in her mind as a ruse for the entity to get her to kill Mustache. Remember earlier how I talked about mobile and static body hallucinations? In theory, it's possible for the entity to put Dr. Cotter in a mobile hallucination, one where she has total control of her body in the real world as a means of manipulating her actions. If the entity has put false layers of reality over what's actually happening, given that she's still in control of her movements, she could 100% be doing something completely different than what is seen in the movie. Perhaps even when she grabbed the scissors in an attempt to defend herself, the entity was actually making her walk towards the cat. You can see in this scene that she's very fidgety with her hands. Maybe this is all just a cover-up from what's actually happening behind the scenes. Maybe even in the same scene, if you look at some of her hand motions, you could probably justify her holding the cat in her arms and placing it into the box when she goes to grab the phone, if you use your imagination a little bit. But it's also entirely possible, in theory, that the entity swaps between mobile and static body hallucinations at precise times in order to manipulate her movements and actions to the best of its ability and slowly inch her way into killing Mustache. Now, all of this seems like extremely wild claims, but after looking at the evidence, it honestly doesn't seem too far from the truth. And trust me when I say this, there is plenty of evidence. First things first, the home invasion just doesn't make sense. How the back door is left open is one of the only things that went unexplained in the entire movie. And based on her reaction, it doesn't seem like this type of thing happens a lot. So the fact that it happened around the same time that she is being psychologically tortured would be one hell of a coincidence. Again, the entity could not have done it because the entity cannot physically interact with the real world. So it would make sense that there was no explanation as to why the back door was open, because it never was. The entire scene was all in her mind. My second bit of evidence is the fact that nowhere past this scene, in which she wakes up next to her fiancé Trevor, is the intruder alarm ever mentioned again. This isn't really evidence, but I'd say that it strengthens my theory because even though the police came and did a walk around, it doesn't exactly feel like something you just brush off the next day. Not to mention, for even further evidence, she was wrapping the gift up directly before the home intrusion scene started. Surely she opened the box at least one time before then, and can at least feel the difference between a train hitting the side of the box versus a cat. That's also part of the reason why I've ruled out any time before this moment to be potential candidates for the cat's death. But all of those smaller details out of the way, I believe that I may have found the most damning evidence for why the entire home invasion scene is completely fake. Look at our list of things that we know the entity can do. Does it say anywhere on this list the ability to see into the future? Now you're probably thinking to yourself right now, what? When did that happen? In this scene with the phone, the entity fakes Rose out by making her think that she answered it, but in reality she didn't. But listen to the first-line security operator over the phone throughout the first and second time that she picked it up.
Hello?
This is First Line Security. May I have your name and the passcode?
Hello?
This is First Line Security. May I have your name and the passcode?
What the operator says, as well as how she says it, is the exact same both times. Seriously, look at it in the editor. Same peaks at the exact same time.
This is First Line Security. May I have your name and the passcode?
It is quite literally the same audio. If we're being led to believe that the second time the phone rings is the real one, but the first time isn't, then how would the entity know every minute detail of exactly how, what, and who was going to be speaking over the phone? This leaves us with two possibilities. One, the entity is a literal god with complete temporal access and knowledge, or two, the entire home invasion scene is fake and fabricated in her mind. And if we stick to the answer that would be the most consistent throughout what we see in the film, the latter is the best theory that we have. One of the most important scenes in this film that backs up my theory even further is the scene directly after the police leave.
Mustache? Mustache?
So, is there a reason you set the alarm?
Oh. I literally don't remember doing it. I must have just set it by accident or something.
Directly after the intruder scene is over, Dr. Cotter calls for Mustache, but gets no response, almost as if the movie was hinting to us that something bad happened recently. Also, her response to what Trevor said regarding the home alarm further supports the theory that she never said it in the first place. And another thing to take out of the scene is the fact that Trevor commented on the alarm going off. How is that important? Well, we've already established that the entire alarm scene in the first place was fake because of the phone call. That phone call is what would have initiated the police to be sent to her house. But because the call wasn't real, neither were the police. They never showed up. And if the police were never there, and the alarm never went off, then Trevor would not have been able to comment on it. What am I saying by all this? In this scene, Trevor is fake too. In fact, poor Rose has been alone this entire time. Trevor did not come home when the movie wants us to think that he did, but rather he probably came home much later to an already sleeping Dr. Cotter after the deed with the cat had already been done. So with this, we are actually ready to construct a timeline of everything that did take place throughout the movie, according to my theory. Well, there's actually one more tiny thing that happens that supports this theory that I quickly want to point out. Right after the scene where Dr. Cotter wakes up, she goes downstairs to further analyze the audio of what happened with her patient that day. And if you've seen the movie, you know exactly how this ends. But what I find the most interesting is what happens after this. Dr. Cotter grabs a knife to defend herself from this thing, a very reasonable thing to do. During the commotion, Trevor actually comes down and starts yelling at Rose to put the knife down, which makes sense at first, but when I really thought about it, given the context up to this point, his response makes virtually no sense at all. Remember, this scene took place before Dr. Cotter had been considered crazy by everyone. There's no real reason to go off on her about this. She's just trying to defend herself. She thought she saw something. And I don't know about you, but if my fiance just dealt with a potential home invasion and in the middle of the night started screaming and wielding a knife, my first instinct would be to protect her from whatever person is inside of my house. From Trevor's perspective, that's two separate incidents within an at most 12-hour span of time in which he has known of some potential threat inside of the house. So why doesn't he take the threat seriously? It's because, like I've been saying, the initial home invasion never happened. That would explain why he was caught so off guard by a knife-wielding Dr. Cotter instead of immediately trying to evacuate the house. Putting it all together, we get a timeline like this. Dr. Cotter returns home from the toy store and begins to wrap her present for Jackson. She doesn't finish wrapping her gift because she gets up to refill her drink. The entity sees this as the perfect moment to mess with her and puts her in a mobile hallucination in which she experiences the home intruder alarm go off. Meanwhile, in the real world, what Dr. Cotter is actually being led to do by the hallucination she's experiencing is inching her way over to her cat Mustache, where she ultimately and unknowingly ends up stabbing him in the neck and killing him. The rest of the time is used packaging the dead cat in the box, as well as taking up filler time in order to justify her hallucinations events. Those filler events being the police arriving to her home, doing that walk around, as well as Trevor coming home around the same time. From her perspective, they end up falling asleep together, but in reality, Trevor was not there. The real Trevor comes home much later to an already sleeping Dr. Cotter and lays next to her until she is eventually woken up by the dream of her dead mother. One clarification that I'd like to make as for why I ruled out the possibility of any of the scenes before the home invasion to be a potential time where Mustache could have been killed is because most of that time is spent out of her house, and the actions that she does then do have a direct impact on the events later on in the movie. For example, this is also around the time that Dr. Cotter gave Joel the cold shoulder, an action that he blatantly comments on much later in the movie.
Assume you're not here to catch up, considering cold shoulder the other day?
I need a favor. I need you to not ask any questions about it.
Yeah, let's hear that.
So, with that knowledge, if this scene was fake and all in her head, then that would mean that practically the majority of the whole movie is fake. And while that would be cool, I don't think that was exactly the notion the producers were going for, especially because the end of the movie hints at Joel being the main protagonist of the sequel. Yeah, so pause. This video script was written like months ago, almost half a year ago, and way before the new Smile 2 trailer dropped. And before then, we had no idea that the sequel was not a direct continuation of the actual movie storyline, so I apologize for that. But ultimately, I don't think it clashes with my theory that badly. I mean, the only real thing I used that to justify was the idea that the entirety of the movie wasn't fake, and I still don't believe that. I mean, kind of be silly if the whole movie was just like, but it was all a dream. So yeah, I don't really believe that. Anyway, oops, my bad. I had no idea that they were doing a completely new set of people for this next movie. But yeah. With all that in mind, this was the best theory that I could construct as to how the movie's events made sense and all came together. I highly recommend that you share your own theories as to what you think happened in the comments below. One alternative theory already given to me is that she never actually bought the train and she just boxed up the cat. This theory says that every time she thought she was looking at the train in the box, it was actually just the cat, and her hallucinations made it seem like it wasn't. This is a good theory, but fails to explain the reason behind why the home intrusion scene happened in the first place, and how the door was open. My initial theory explains that the home invasion was just a cover-up for the cat to die, and that entire scene was faked. But following this alternative theory, there are still some unanswered questions. There's more evidence that points to the home intrusion scene being faked rather than not, and if it wasn't fake, then there's no explanation for how the door was left open. If it was faked following this alternative theory, then there would have been no point to fake it in the first place, because the entity is not accomplishing anything other than mild scares and making her feel crazy. Which I guess in a way is the point of the movie, but it would just be unnecessarily long and complex. And also remember what I said about if this scene is real, then the entity would be indistinguishable from a god because of its ability to essentially predict events in the future. That's why I think the intruder alarm never went off, and all the events from that scene until she wakes up next to her fiancé Trevor were all fabricated. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It doesn't hurt you to do so, and it only helps me. Like I said before, this was a video I've been planning on making since a long time ago. I had this theory practically ever since the movie first released. I think I was actually in the movie theater watching it for the first time when I said, how did the cat die? And obsessed over this question for weeks. Regardless, I had a lot of fun trying to come up with a timeline that made sense and packing it all into a video. My content is purely created by feedback, so if you want to see more of this style of video, I will happily do more if I see enough positive feedback. But until then, we'll just have to see where everything goes. I really hope you enjoyed my theory, and for everyone watching, I hope you have a lovely day. See you in the next video whenever that may be. Bye bye!